Hi, welcome to our segment related to the Pacific arts. We're going to be looking at art made in the Pacific Islands. Sometimes it's referred to as oceanic art. The arts of the Pacific vary by virtue of ecological situations, social structure, and the impact of external influences such as commerce, colonialism, and missionary activity. Created in a variety of media, Pacific arts are distinguished by the virtuosity with which materials are used and presented. Certain areas of the Pacific are some of the oldest inhabited places on Earth, and yet, paradoxically, some areas are among the newest. Aborigines reached Australia around 50,000 years ago, but the remote islands of the Pacific, like Hawaii, the Easter Island, and New Zealand, were occupied only in the last 1,000 years or so. Around 1300 BCE, seafarers reached across the vast oceanic expanse to chart their ways toward Fiji in the central South Pacific. Technological developments of sailing craft meant greater territories could be mapped and chartered for possible occupation. European involvement in the Pacific began with circumnavigation of the globe by Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan and his crew. Explorers of the 18th century were followed by occupiers from the 19th century who implanted European customs, values, religions, and technologies onto the indigenous population. Many areas of the Pacific, however, achieved independence in the 20th century. So I'm going to talk a little bit about patronage and artistic life. Men and women had clearly defined roles in Pacific society, including which sex could create works of art in which media. Men carved in wood, women sewed and made pottery. One of the most characteristic works still done by Pacific women is the weaving of bark cloth or tapa, and we're going to see some examples of that. All right, so we're going to be traveling to Easter Island. This island is famous for its stone statues of human figures known as Osmoa. I'm probably saying it wrong. It's spelled Asmoai, meaning statue. The island is known to its inhabitants as Rapa Nu. The Moe, maybe that's how you say it, were probably carved to commemorate important ancestors and were made from around 1000 CE until the second half of the 17th century. Over a few hundred years, the inhabitants of this remote island quarried, carved, and erected these monuments. And there's probably around 887 moai. So here we're looking at a particular statue. This is known as Lost or Stolen Friend, and this is three views. And I read you the translated title. I think it's Ho Hakana is how you say it. And so this dates around 12,000 CE. So these are made of basalt. These were painted probably, and I think they, in their eye sockets, had coral, and so that's missing as well, or perhaps stone. And so these were found in the ceremonial center of Orongo. This monumental carving of the head and torso of a man is almost twice life-size. The proportions are typical of these statues, with one head 1/3 of the total height of the figure. The size and complexity of the moe increased over time, and it is believed that Ho Hakana'a dates to around 12,000 CE. It is one of only 14 moe made from basalt. The rest are carved from the island's softer volcanic tuff. With the adoption of Christianity in the 1860s, the remaining standing moe were toppled. This example was probably first displayed outside of a stone platform called Ahu, A-H-U, on the sacred site of Orongo before being moved into a stone house at the ritual center of Orongo. It would have stood with giant stone companions, their backs to the sea, keeping the watch over the island. Its eye sockets were originally inlaid with redstone and coral, and the sculpture was painted with red and white designs, which were washed off when it was rafted to the ship to be taken to Europe in 1869. It was collected by the crew of the English ship HMS Topaz under the commander of Richard Ashmore Powell on their visit to Easter Island in 1868 to carry out surveying work. Islanders helped the crew to move the statue, which has been estimated to weigh around 4 tons. It was moved to the beach and then taken to the Topaz by raft. Important, and this is something we're going to talk about a lot when we look at ancient sculptures. Often ancient sculptures were painted, and obviously over time the paint has worn away. But you really have to, in the context of which the piece was created, remember that, because when we see them in their natural state, they really look different than the way they would have in their original painted form. This will become really important when we look at Mediterranean art, in particular Greek and Roman marble statues, because those were also painted. So Ho Hakana Ana, I'm just going to say the lost or stolen friend, is similar in appearance. Let me go to the next slide. To a number of Easter Island moai, it has a heavy eyebrow ridge, elongated ears, and oval nostrils. The clavicle is emphasized and his nipples on his chest seem to protrude. The arms are thin and lie tightly. I should go back against the body. The hands are not very intricate, so they seem a little bit unfinished. In the British Museum, the figure is set on a stone platform just over 1 meter high so that it appears to tower above the visitor. It is carved out of dark gray basalt, a hard, dense, fine-grained volcanic rock. The surface of the rock is rough and pitted, and pinpricks of light sparkle as teeny crystals in the rock glint. So you can sort of imagine how this must have looked in its natural setting. It must have been quite impressive looking and very awe-inspiring. Basalt is very difficult to carve and unforgiving of errors. The sculpture was probably commissioned by a high-status individual. So here it is displayed. So Lost or Stolen Friends, its head is slightly tilted back as if scanning a distant horizon. He has, again, the prominent eyebrow ridge shadowing the empty sockets of his eyes. The nose is long and straight, ending in large oval nostrils. So very, it's a anthropomorphic figure. It's human, but it's also very stylized, very abstracted. The thin lips are set in a downward curve, giving the face a stern, uncompromising expression. A faint vertical line in low relief runs from the center of the mouth to the chin. The jawline is well defined and massive, and the ears are long, beginning at the top of the head and ending with these sort of pendulous lobes. The figure's collarbone, again, is emphasized by this very curved indentation right here. And his chest is defined by carved lines that run kind of up and down from the top of his arms and curve upwards onto the breast to end in these kind of small protruding bumps that define his nipples. The arms are held close against the side of the body. The hands are very rudimentary, carved in low relief. So they didn't really maybe think of these as very important. It seems to be the emphasis is up here. Here's a back view. The figure's back is covered with ceremonial designs believed to have been added at a later date, some carved in low relief, others incised. These show images relating to the island's Birdman Cult, which developed after about 14,000 CE. The key Birdman Cult ritual was an annual trial of strength and endurance in which the chiefs and their followers competed. Victorious chief was then represented. The victorious chief then represented the creator god Maki for the following year. So he kind of got to masquerade as this god, I guess. And so this is so just so you know, the stars indicate the actual picture that is in your, that the AP College Board uses. So I often include other pictures, but I just wanted you to know which official picture they're using. So here are some of these statues. These are the platforms on which some of the moai were placed. It's still unknown why some moai are on platforms lined up side by side, while many are simply scattered around the shores in the Ronku Raraku area. Each ahu is made of a large number of smaller stones. These are the platforms, which are put together in such a way that they form a long platform on which moai statues can stand. Often the ahu were burial places where important personalities' graves were built. So obviously people of status. In total, there are 313 ahu or platforms that were built, and only 125 have moai on them, most of which only had a single statue of them. Some of these platforms were destroyed during the tribal wars, while Ahu Tongariki was swept inland by a tidal wave, a tsunami. Later, many of them were restored by specialists. Interestingly, there were several empty platforms found. Some speculate that there might have been wooden moai as well. With time, they perished, perhaps during the conflict or because wood could not cope with the weather for so many hundreds of years. Another possibility is that when all trees were cut down on the island, the locals turned to the wooden moai and simply used them as raw material. So they kind of had to recycle them once they used up some of their natural resources. Right, so we're going to look at our next object. We're traveling to Hawaii. And so this is a feather cape. The Hawaiian male nobility wore feather cloaks and capes for ceremonies and battles. Such cloaks and capes were called ahu'ula, or red garments. Across Polynesia, the color red was associated with both gods and chiefs. In the Hawaiian Islands, however, yellow feathers became equally valuable due to their sacredness. They consisted of Olona, um, Tushardia latifolia, that's in parentheses, which I guess is a fiber netting made in straight rows, with pieces joined and cut to form the desired shape. Teeny bundles of feather were attached to the netting in overlapping rows starting at the lower edge. The exterior of this example is covered with red feathers from the iwi bird, which is also known as Vasteria colchina. Yellow feathers from the bird, which is, it says apostrophe O, and I guess its official name is the Moho nobilis, and black feathers also from the Moho nobilis. So it's constructed of various feathers from various birds that probably were had some sort of symbolic connotation attached to them. This small cape had a shaped neckline which closely fit the wearer. The style of the semicircular cape is considered a later development from the trapezoidal shape that they used before. Larger numbers of feathered cloaks and capes were given as gifts to the sea captains and their crews, who were the earliest European visitors to Hawaii. Some of these attractive items would then have passed into the hands of wealthy patrons who financed their voyage. So we see this kind of exchange um, with Europe and these indigenous islands. It is not known who brought this particular cape to England. So a lot of the works we're viewing are actually located in the British Museum, and a lot of the works that you'll see, have been appropriated or brought to Europe and are displayed there in museums. This is our next work of art. So we're going to be going to the Cook Islands. The Cook Islands are situated in the middle of the South Pacific. The wood carvers of the island of Rarotonga, one of the Cook Islands, have a distinctive style. The Cook Islands were settled around the period of 800 to 1000 CE. Captain Cook made the first official European sighting of the island in 1773, but spent little time in the area during his voyages. In 1821, the London Missionary Society set up a mission station on the island of Aitutaki, followed by one of Rarotonga in 1827. The Cook Islands became a British protectorate in 1888 and then was annexed in 1901. Since then, they have been administered by New Zealand. So representations of the deities worshipped by Cook Islanders before their conversion to Christianity their conversion to Christianity included wooden images in human form, slab carvings, and staffs such as this, known as god sticks. They varied in size from about 73 centimeters to nearly 4 meters, like this rare example that you're looking at. You can't see the figure because right now it's wrapped up. The upper part of the staff consists of a carved head above smaller carved figures. So that's kind of what's inside. The lower end is a carved kind of phallus shape. Some missionaries removed and destroyed the phalluses from carvings because they considered them obscene. Reverend John Williams observed of this image that the bark cloth, which is what the staff is wrapped in, contained red feathers and pieces of pearl shell, known as the manava, or spirit of the god. He also recorded seeing the islanders carrying the image upright on a litter. I guess it's some sort of stick. This image was among 14 presented to the Reverend John Williams at Rarotonga in May 1827. And I have a contextual image to show you that. I'll go to it really quickly. So this is sort of a presentation, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Reverend. But here you can see them, and I think this is the litter or leader that they're sort of carrying it up on. So I guess it's sort of like a tray almost. So the only surviving wrapped example of a larger staff god is this impressive image. See how thick it was wrapped. Is composed of a central wood shaft wrapped in an enormous roll of decorated bark cloth. There are no other surviving large staff gods from the Cook Islands that retain their bark cloth wrapping as this one does. This was probably one of the most sacred of Rarotonga's objects. This impressive image is composed of a central wood shaft wrapped in an enormous roll of decorated bark cloth. The shaft is the form of an elongated body with a head and small figures at the end. The other end, composed of small figures and a naturalistic genitalia, is missing. A feathered pendant is bound. I don't know if I have a picture of that, but I'll show you where it would have been. It's missing on the example I have on one ear. So this is where it would have been. I'm not sure why it's not there. I might have a different version, um, but you can kind of see here these images. So little is known of the function or identity of these images. The ethnologist Roger Duff speculated that they represented Tanangara, the creator god, but without evidence, we're not for sure. What is clear is that in their materials, they combine the results of skilled labor of men and women. So you can see it's intricately carved. They also have explicit sexual aspects, thus embodying male and female productive and reproductive qualities. Here's another detail of the staff. This staff god is a potent combination of male and female elements. The wooden core made by male carvers has a large head at one end, which we just looked at, and originally terminated in a phallus. Smaller figures in profile appear to be prominently male. Um, and one of the curators of the Cook Island Library and Museum Society suggests that the other figures facing outward could depict women and children, or women in childbirth, because they're sort of splayed out. The bark cloth made by women not only protects the ancestral power, which is known as mana, of the deity, but contains it within different layers. So we do have these very specific roles designated to genders in terms of helping to create this piece. Here is an image of the bark cloth, and it's all wrapped up, so you can see the intricacy and the details of it. So this is a context image that that depicts the Reverend John Williams, who lived from 1796 to 1839. He was a reverend and basically a missionary traveling to the Cook Islands, and we can see this sort of presentation of these staff gods. The life of Reverend John Williams is one of the most remarkable stories of European colonization of the Pacific. In his memoirs published in 1837, Williams claimed to have traveled 100,000 miles in 18 years promoting the spread of the gospel around the Pacific. Here in this image, we can see a tapa cloth-wearing Polynesians laying Rarotonga or staff gods at the feet of the Williams and their associates. So you can see two couples right here, and then you can see the little staffs being laid down in front of them. And these are the Pittmans, I think, were traveling with the Williams. And to the right, a large staff standing God dominates the scene, and the image bears the biblical quote from Isaiah, quote, "And the idols he shall utterly abolish." In his narrative, Williams describes Tuhani, a chief of Rarotonga and a deacon, to the Williams, telling the locals, "These are some things we term the poison of the sea." These idols hanging here were the poison of the land, for both body and soul were poisoned by them. But let us rejoice, their reign is over. So we can see this sort of this conversion of Christianity. The idols, the toppled trophies that Williams rather dismissively gestures towards in this image, you can see him here, are some of the ones along with weapons removed from Atukati and Rarotonga from these islands. And these were described by Williams in his memoirs and sent back to London, and are now held in the British Museum's collection. All right, so I'm going to stop here, and we'll pick up with some other works of art. So stay tuned in part 2. We're actually going to be looking at bark cloth, as well as some statues, some smaller statues, and some architecture as well. So stay tuned for part 2.